Hello, welcome to the channel. This is part one of a series around generative AI and Azure Logic Apps, something that I'm calling Innovate, where you integrate, which is borrowed from a colleague, Harold Campos. So thanks, Harold, for the title. All right, so let's talk a little bit about why this is important. So generative AI, there's no question, it's very disruptive. It's obviously very much front and center these days whenever you go on LinkedIn or watch any sort of like news briefing or business channel. And I don't think that this is going to slow down anytime soon because there's something real about generative AI. Is it perfect? No. But you must admit that it can do some pretty interesting things. And I think they'll only become more and more interesting. Now, I've previously shared some thoughts around generative AI, and it's been quite well received. I'll put a link in the description. But I wanted to expand upon that video and actually share some of our thinking that we shared at Integrate, the Integrate conference recently in London, June 2024. And there was definitely, it was kind of an interesting conference where I presented on day two with respect to generative AI. And so on the first day, I had a lot of questions and people coming up to me and wanting to talk about generative AI. And there was kind of this, fairly common thought that, this AI stuff is interesting, but I just don't think I've got a use case. And hopefully as we get through this series, that there'll be plenty of ideas that you can go ahead and act upon. And I think that's really sort of the goal of this particular series. Now, I'm breaking this down into 3 videos just so it's a little bit more manageable for everyone to consume. And the first one, which is this one, will be around developer productivity. The second one will be around the retrieval and augmented generation, or also known as RAG pattern in Azure Logic Apps. And then third is using Azure Logic Apps as a plugin. So that's kind of the foundation for this session. Hope you enjoy it. Feel free to ask questions, put comments in the comment section. Would love to hear from you. Thanks again, and let me know what you think. All right, so when we talk about AI investments for Azure Logic Apps, we typically look at them from 2 different lenses. The first being boosting developer productivity using AI capabilities. So how can we infuse our experiences with AI to allow developers to become more productive? Now, the next lens is how can we enable our customers to go ahead and build generative AI applications using Azure Integration Services, and in this case, more specifically, Azure Logic Apps. So we're going to focus on the first side here, the boosting developer productivity in this video. And then as we get into videos 2 and 3, we will look into intelligent application building using Azure Logic Apps. All right, so one of the sort of the capabilities or tools that we do have is Workflow Assistant. And you can kind of think of this as a co-pilot in the Logic Apps Workflow Designer. So this is something that has been shipped in preview. This is basically a screenshot from our Azure portal experience. And when you go ahead and you click on this assistant icon here, you will then see this panel open up that allows you to go ahead and essentially chat with your workflow. Now, under the hood, we are using Azure OpenAI and ChatGPT technologies to enable this. And what we allow you to go ahead and do is go ahead and request a description of this workflow. And you can see that on screen. Someone has put in the prompt, describe this workflow. And what it does is it goes through and gives you a description of it itself. Now, it's not just reading the screen here. It is actually understanding what is occurring, and will actually give you some additional context as well. So maybe you've got specific parameters or expressions, and those are things that can be highlighted using this experience. Now, it also extends beyond that as well. So let's talk about a few other use cases where this can be used. So this is describe the purpose of this workflow. And here you can go ahead and see, like in step number 5, it updates the order status to be processed in the common data service. So this is something that it was able to infer based upon what the workflow was doing. This wasn't something that it's just reading labels. Another situation might be around recommendations. So which is generally what LLM applications are very good at. And in this case, it could be a matter of like, hey, what connectors can I use to send email? And you could also ask this situation, like a question or a prompt about, hey, how would I go ahead and call custom code? And basically the workflow assistant will return back and give you some guidance in terms of how you can get started. Now, testing's interesting, and I can see this being quite valuable. Now, this isn't sort of a full test feature, but in this case, we've got an HTTP trigger. That trigger does have a message body. It's got a schema that is embedded inside of that trigger. So using the workflow assistant, we can ask it to go ahead and create sample data that aligns to that specific trigger schema. So instead of you having to sort of create your own, this is something that you can ask it to go ahead and do it for you, which is obviously a nice productivity boost. I would say there's a similar opportunity here with respect to just expressions. So sometimes writing expressions can be a little bit cumbersome, but what if you had a buddy or an assistant that could help you go ahead and construct those Logic Apps workflow definition language expressions in, say, like a compose action, or just in when using dynamic content. And so that's another opportunity as well. Then the last scenario we'll talk about here is just around like patterns or guidance. And in this case, you could ask for what design patterns are available for Logic Apps when considering sequential processing. Now, what's kind of interesting about this is like there's a few spelling mistakes that actually show up in the prompt. And, even with those spelling mistakes, the LLM is able to understand what you're trying to achieve and to provide you with some guidance. So that's what's currently available. Now, these are some areas that we are exploring, and so these are on our radar, and I think these make a lot of sense. The first one being create workflows using natural language. So me being able to describe what I want my workflow to go ahead and do, and then the workflow being, created for me, I can go ahead and review it. I can make changes to it, do whatever I want to go ahead and sort of manage it. The next would be editing workflows. So in a similar model, maybe I've got an existing workflow in place. I want to swap out the Salesforce connector with the Dataverse connector, and I can go ahead and do that using natural language. Another area that we're keenly keeping an eye on is the data mapping. And so naturally, data transformations typically take up a large portion of customer projects. And if there's opportunities to use generative AI to accelerate the data mapping, that naturally sounds quite interesting. And then similar to what we talked about with describing a workflow, just giving a little fuller experience around documentation and being able to export, say, like a document that describes your workflow. And this might be a situation where you use it in your change management processes. So yeah, that is part one, short and sweet, but go ahead and check out the Workflow Assistant. It is available today in the Azure portal, and you can go ahead and chat with it and get some guidance. And then we'll get to the next video here where we'll talk about how you can go ahead and use generative AI in your intelligent applications to solve problems. So thanks for checking this video out.